The air in Arthur Jr.'s impeccably decorated living room, a space usually imbued with a sense of familial warmth and connection, had become unnervingly charged. The scent of expensive lilies, a lavish centerpiece I had sent as a congratulatory gesture for their impending wedding, now seemed to mock me with its cloying sweetness. I sat, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, the polished mahogany of the coffee table reflecting a face I barely recognized as my own. A mask of polite expectation I had worn for years, an actor in a play where my role was increasingly diminishing. The conversation had started innocently enough, a casual inquiry about the wedding details, a discussion of venue options and guest lists, a topic I had anticipated with a flutter of paternal pride. But Clara, my son's fiancée, with her unnervingly direct gaze and a smile that never quite reached her eyes, had steered the conversation towards an abrupt, chilling denouement. "Oh, Theodore," she'd purred, the endearment feeling like a barb, her voice dripping with a false sweetness. "We've decided to keep things very intimate. We actually got married yesterday. It was just a small ceremony, you know. Only the truly significant people were invited." The words, delivered with a casual cruelty that belied their devastating impact, struck me with the force of a physical blow, stealing the breath from my lungs and leaving a hollow ache in my chest. Significant people. The phrase echoed, a venomous whisper in the sudden, suffocating silence. Had I, Theodore Vance, a man who had dedicated 15 years of his life since the untimely death of my wife, Eleanor, to nurturing his son, Arthur Jr., and ensuring the prosperity of the family business, not earned a place among the significant? I had poured not only my time and expertise, but also the very inheritance Eleanor had left us, a nest egg meant for my own comfort in my later years, into Arthur Jr.'s ventures, believing I was building a legacy, a shared future, a testament to the love and sacrifices I had made. The carefully selected tie I had bought for Arthur Jr., a deep sapphire blue I knew would complement his eyes, felt like a costume for a play I had been unceremoniously cut from. The wedding photos that began to flood my social media feed throughout the day were a slow, agonizing torture. Clara, radiant in a gown I had helped finance with a generous gift to Arthur Jr. just weeks prior. Her parents beaming with pride. Her siblings raising toasts. My absence was a glaring, undeniable void, a testament to my perceived insignificance in the life of my only son. Arthur Jr., usually so eager to deflect any hint of disapproval or offer a reassuring word, offered only a weak, rehearsed excuse, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond my shoulder, his posture rigid. "It was a spur-of-the-moment thing, Dad, very low-key. Just us and a couple of witnesses." But the digital evidence was irrefutable, a stark betrayal etched in pixels, a clear indication that the narrative he offered was a carefully crafted lie. The silence that followed Clara's pronouncement was suffocating, broken only by the soft, almost imperceptible hum of the state-of-the-art refrigerator I had purchased for them, a final gift to a home where I was apparently not considered important enough to share in its most momentous occasion. Arthur Jr.'s gaze, usually so open and honest, was averted, replaced by a tense rigidity that spoke of complicity rather than regret. His silence was an admission, a tacit agreement with Clara's cruel assessment of my status. Later, when I managed to gather the fragments of my composure and confront him, his response was a familiar, frustrating blend of evasion and manufactured sincerity. "It was a spur-of-the-moment thing, Dad," he repeated, his voice lacking conviction, "very low-key, just us and a couple of witnesses." But I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this was a carefully crafted lie. The digital trail was already indelible. Clara's parents, their faces etched with proprietary pride, posed alongside the newlyweds. Her siblings clinked champagne glasses in a toast that excluded me. And there was Clara, resplendent in a white gown, a gown whose very fabric seemed woven from the substantial sum I had gifted her last month for her personal expenses. money I had earmarked for a much-needed roof repair on my own aging home. I saw everything I was not supposed to see: the exclusion, the deceit, the calculated manipulation that had culminated in this profound humiliation. For years, I had navigated a minefield of unspoken expectations, carefully weighing every word, every gesture, every financial contribution, desperately seeking a crumb of genuine affection from my own son. I had strived to be the perfect father, the obliging father-in-law, the silent provider who never questioned or protested, content to be an invisible, indispensable presence. But Clara's words, "significant people," had pricked a dormant nerve, awakening a realization that had been buried too long beneath layers of dutiful sacrifice. I had meticulously, if subconsciously, tallied the cost of my devotion. The rent on their apartment, which I had consistently covered for 3 years, amounted to a substantial sum. The furniture, the appliances, the countless grocery bills, the emergency loans for Arthur's ventures, the extravagant gifts for Clara's whims. It all represented a significant portion of Eleanor's inheritance, funds I had intended for my own security, my own peace in the twilight of my years. To have this immense generosity, this quiet love, culminate in being treated as a stranger on my son's wedding day was a betrayal so profound it threatened to shatter me. The wedding itself, a triumph of curated perfection and manufactured joy, now seemed like a meticulously staged charade, the culmination of a long, insidious plan. The memory of Arthur Jr.'s early years, however, remained a poignant counterpoint to the present reality. I recalled the pride I felt watching him grow, the shared dreams I had for his future. Since Eleanor's passing 15 years ago, my focus had narrowed, centering almost entirely on Arthur Jr.'s development and success. I had poured not only my time and expertise, but also the very inheritance she had left us, a substantial nest egg meant to ensure my own comfort in my later years, into Arthur Jr.'s ventures. Each financial request, from the down payment on his first apartment to the capital for his fledgling business, had been met with my willing support. "Dad, this next investment is the one," he'd say, his eyes alight with conviction, and I, ever the doting father, would oblige, drawing from my own savings, deferring my own retirement plans. I'd bought him his first car, paid for his postgraduate studies, and even facilitated the purchase of his current apartment, a testament to Clara's refined taste and his own burgeoning success. Clara's entry into his life had been a noticeable shift. Her ambition was palpable, her desire for financial security evident in every word, every subtle manipulation aimed at Arthur Jr.'s ear. I remembered instances where Clara had suggested I look into certain investment opportunities, often with exceptionally high returns promised. Opportunities I had later discovered were either overly risky or non-existent. I dismissed these concerns, attributing them to Clara's eagerness to integrate into the family and Arthur Jr.'s youthful optimism. I had always believed in second chances, in the inherent goodness of my son, and in the power of a stable family unit. Eleanor, my late wife, had always been the more cautious one, her gentle warnings often lost in my own optimistic nature. "Theodore," she'd say, her brow furrowed with concern, "Arthur is a good boy, but Clara, she has a way of making things seem brighter than they are. Be careful with your heart and your wallet." Her words, meant as gentle counsel, now echoed with a prophetic resonance, a lament for the years of unquestioning faith I had placed in my son and his chosen partner. I remembered filling out transfer forms, signing over funds, each act a brick in the foundation of the life I believed Arthur Jr. was building, a life I thought would one day reflect the sacrifices I had made. I had believed in the inherent goodness of my son, in the strength of our family bonds, in the security of a legacy built on years of hard work and devotion. That belief, I now understood with crushing clarity, was the most significant sacrifice of all, a foundation built on sand. Each dollar transferred represented not just a financial transaction, but a piece of my trust, a fragment of my hopes for his future, a belief in the inherent decency that should bind a family. The wedding, meant to be the pinnacle of this shared vision, had become its undoing. The stark reality was that my love, my financial support, my very presence in his life, had been calculated not for genuine affection, but for strategic gain. This realization was a bitter, crushing weight. My desperate attempts to rationalize the empty bank account, the sheer impossibility of my entire savings simply vanishing overnight, dissolved with each unanswered call to Arthur Jr. S. Mobile. The wedding photos, which Clara had so eagerly shared, now seemed like cruel taunts. Clara beaming, Arthur Jr. looking relieved rather than joyous, surrounded by Clara's family, their faces radiating a shared sense of triumph that conspicuously excluded me. My own photo album, filled with pictures of Arthur Jr.'s childhood, his graduation, his early business successes, felt like relics from a distant past, a life viewed through a distorted lens, a narrative I had painstakingly constructed. The truth, stark and brutal, began to emerge from the lingering fog of disbelief, piercing through the remnants of my paternal optimism. The wedding wasn't merely a celebration, it was the meticulously orchestrated exit strategy for a grand, devastating con. The financial depletion wasn't an error. It was a calculated theft, executed with chilling precision. Arthur Jr. hadn't simply disappeared. He had vanished, taking with him my life savings, my trust, and a significant piece of my heart. The realization struck me with the force of a physical blow. I had been a target, a source of funds for a crime perpetrated by my own son. The man I had raised, the man I had believed in with every fiber of my being, had orchestrated this elaborate deception, using the sanctity of marriage as his cover. My life, which I had carefully built upon a foundation of trust and familial loyalty, was suddenly crumbling around me. The comfortable retirement I had envisioned, the peaceful years ahead, filled with Arthur Sr.'s memory and shared legacies, evaporated like mist in the morning sun. Anger, hot and sharp, began to simmer beneath the shock and disbelief. It wasn't just about the money, though the sheer scale of the financial loss was catastrophic. It was about the violation, the betrayal of everything I held dear, my trust, my love, my paternal role, my carefully constructed world, built on the assumption of unbreakable familial bonds, had been systematically dismantled by the very person I had sworn to protect and support. I sat in my study, the room that had once symbolized my professional success and personal comfort, now feeling like an empty shell, a monument to my misplaced faith. I looked at my hands that had signed countless checks, built successful businesses, and held my son as a child, and saw them now as instruments of my own undoing. The truth was undeniable. I had been a fool, blinded by paternal love and an unwavering belief in my son's character. The consequences were catastrophic, reaching far beyond the depleted bank account. This was not just a financial loss, it was an existential one, a shattering of my reality, a stark confrontation with the void where my son used to be. The wedding, a symbol of continuity and family strength, had instead become the stage for its ultimate destruction. I was no longer a father. I was a victim, a mark, a fool who had poured his heart and soul into a well that ran dry without a single drop of genuine affection returned. The stark realization hit me with full force. My love, my trust, my financial support had been a commodity, a means to an end, and once that end was achieved, I was discarded. Driven by a desperate need for answers, for a shred of explanation that could make sense of this unfathomable act, I decided to visit Arthur Jr. S. and Clara S. meticulously curated apartment, the one I had helped him secure with a generous down payment, the one that now represented the epicenter of my undoing. Perhaps in person, faced with the reality of my presence, they would be forced to confront me, to offer some semblance of an explanation, however hollow, however late. As I approached their sleek, modern building, a structure Clara had insisted upon for its prestige and proximity to high-end boutiques, a knot of anxiety tightened in my chest, far more oppressive than the usual wedding-related nerves. I pressed the buzzer for Arthur Jr., S Unit. Silence. I tried again, a firm, insistent press, then a third time. Still no answer. A sense of dread, cold and absolute, washed over me, chilling me to the bone. I then reached for my phone, dialing Arthur Jr. as his mobile, the same phone that had gone straight to voicemail since yesterday morning. This time, to my immense surprise, it rang. My heart leaped with a desperate, fragile hope, a tiny spark against the encroaching darkness. Arthur Jr., I managed, my voice tight, cracking with a mixture of relief and apprehension. A click, and then a distorted voice, heavily accented, replied, "This number is no longer in service." The line went dead, disconnected, erased. It was a brutal, undeniable confirmation, a final, chilling punctuation mark on their elaborate deception. They hadn't just stolen my money. They had erased me from their lives, from their future, from their very existence. I stood on the sidewalk, the city's relentless energy a painful counterpoint to my internal devastation. The sounds of the city blurred around me, the distant sirens, the laughter of passers-by, the ordinary bustle of life a stark, painful contrast to the seismic shift that had occurred within me. They were gone, vanished, and with them, my son, my trust, and my financial security. The wedding, I now understood with sickening clarity, had been the final curtain call on a performance of filial devotion, a meticulously planned exit strategy. The anger, which had been simmering beneath the shock and disbelief, now threatened to consume me entirely. It wasn't just a betrayal of trust, it was a calculated, deliberate act of destruction, a crime perpetrated with a cold, unnerving precision. The wedding had been the elaborate cover, the final act in a drama of deceit. As I stood there on the sidewalk, the city's relentless energy, a painful counterpoint to my internal devastation, a profound sense of clarity, sharp and cold, began to cut through the lingering shock and despair. They had taken my money, my trust, and my son, but they had not taken my will, nor my dignity. They had orchestrated their escape, their ultimate act of betrayal, with a chilling precision, but in doing so, they had also inadvertently unleashed something within me. This wasn't just about reclaiming lost funds. It was about reclaiming myself. I turned away from their silent, empty apartment, my steps no longer faltering, but purposeful, imbued with a new, unexpected resolve. My first act of defiance wouldn't be to chase them, to beg for answers, or to plead for explanations from the void they had left behind. My first victory would be to refuse to be defined by their actions, to refuse to let their betrayal shatter the core of who I was. I walked not towards the comforting familiarity of my home, which now felt tainted and threatened, but towards the nearest police station. My voice, when I spoke to the desk sergeant, was steady, filled with a resolve I hadn't known I possessed. "My son has defrauded me," I stated, my gaze direct and unwavering. "He took everything I had, and then he disappeared. I want to file a report." It was a small step, perhaps, against a tide of immense loss and overwhelming betrayal. But it was my step. It was the first assertion of my will against their calculated destruction. It was the moment I refused to be a passive victim, to be defined solely by what had been taken from me. The anger, the despair, the humiliation of being duped by my own son, the sheer audacity of his crime, these were bitter pills. But in that moment, standing at the precipice of a new, unwelcome reality, I chose not to be broken. I chose to fight. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with the daunting prospect of legal battles and the crushing weight of emotional recovery. But in that single defiant act, I had taken the first crucial step towards reclaiming my own agency, and by extension, my liberation. The feeling of empowerment, though fragile, was a stark contrast to the helplessness that had threatened to consume me moments before. This was not the end. It was the beginning of my fight. The sterile, impersonal environment of the police station offered a stark contrast to the emotional chaos churning within me. The air was cool, smelling faintly of disinfectant and old paper, a world away from the perfumed opulence of the Crestwood Hotel. Detective Miller, a woman whose professional demeanor was tempered by a weary understanding of human failings, listened to my account with a focused intensity. Her gaze was steady, her questions precise, cutting through the fog of my emotional distress with the cold logic of an investigation. Mr. Vance, Arthur Jr. What was his profession? Did he have any known associates involved in financial schemes? Any history of gambling, debts, or unusual behavior leading up to the wedding? Her inquiries were not about the emotional devastation, the shattering of paternal love, but about factual evidence, about the mechanics of the crime, about the cold, hard data that could form the basis of a case. She explained the complexities of international wire transfers, the near insurmountable difficulty of tracking individuals who deliberately erase their digital footprints, and the paramount importance of gathering every piece of documentation I possessed. Bank statements showing the depleted accounts, wedding vendor invoices that underscored the pretense, any communication records, however seemingly innocuous they might appear now. "We'll issue an alert," she stated, her tone matter-of-fact, her eyes conveying a seasoned pragmatism. "But recovering the funds will be challenging, and locating him even more so. Your priority now, Mr. Vance, is to secure your remaining assets and prevent any further loss." Her counsel, though devoid of personal sympathy, was profoundly grounding. It offered a path, a structured approach to dealing with the overwhelming devastation, a way to channel my anger and despair into tangible action. She confirmed my suspicion that the wedding itself had been the elaborate cover, the final brilliant act of a long-planned con. The efficiency of her office, the systematic way they began processing my report, the quiet determination in her eyes, provided a sliver of comfort in the encroaching darkness. This was not just a family tragedy. It was a crime, and in identifying it as such, a path forward, however dimly lit, began to emerge. She was my first ally, a professional force of order in the face of utter chaos, a stark reminder that justice, though often slow, was a tangible possibility. She outlined the procedures, filing a formal report, initiating a fraud investigation, and the necessary steps to try and freeze any accessible assets, though she cautioned that the nature of the transfers made recovery difficult. She advised me to change all passwords immediately, to notify all financial institutions of the potential fraud, and to cease all direct communication with Arthur Jr. and Clara, instructing me to direct any future contact through the police department. Her objective, clear focus on actionable steps, provided a much-needed anchor in the swirling emotional tempest I found myself in. The days that followed the police report were a bleak landscape of administrative tasks and a gnawing, pervasive emptiness. The house, once filled with Arthur Sr.'s comforting presence and the vibrant echoes of Arthur Jr.'s childhood, now felt cavernous, each silent room an accusation, each cherished object a painful reminder of the life that was rapidly being dismantled and stolen. The silence, once a balm, was now broken only by the phantom buzz of my phone, a constant, agonizing reminder of the connection that had been so brutally severed, the calls that would never come. I found myself wandering through rooms, my fingers tracing familiar surfaces, touching objects that once held profound meaning, now tainted by the corrosive sting of betrayal. It was during one of these solitary, aimless walks through the neighborhood, walks I had taken countless times before, usually en route to the market to pick up groceries or to the bank to process transfers, but now driven by a restless unease and a desperate need to escape the suffocating atmosphere of my own home, that I found myself standing outside the office of Mr. Davies, an estate lawyer whose name Arthur Sr. had mentioned once in passing as a reliable, discreet professional. A name I had never needed until this devastating moment. Hesitantly, I pushed open the door, the quiet hum of efficiency within the office a stark contrast to the tempest raging in my mind. Mr. Davies, a man with kind eyes and a reassuringly calm demeanor, listened patiently as I recounted the events of the past week, my voice trembling at times, the narrative punctuated by pauses as I struggled to articulate the depth of my pain and disbelief. He examined the documents I had brought, the wedding invoices, Clara's threatening emails, the legal letter, my bank statements showing the catastrophic depletion. His brow furrowed as he read, his professional expression shifting to one of grave concern. "Mr. Vance," he said, his voice grave, "this is highly irregular. The circumstances you describe, particularly the timing and the complete emptying of your accounts immediately following the wedding, strongly suggest a premeditated financial fraud, likely involving your son and his wife." His words, though offering a fragile flicker of hope in the possibility of legal recourse, also underscored the enormity of the challenge ahead. This was no longer just a matter of emotional hurt. It was a legal battle for my financial survival, my security, my very identity. He explained the uphill battle of recovering funds once they had been laundered or moved offshore. But he also outlined the possibility of pursuing civil claims against those who might have aided and abetted the scheme, including Clara's family, if evidence supported their involvement. He suggested I gather every scrap of communication I had with Arthur Jr. and Clara, every record of financial assistance I had provided, no matter how small, as this documentation could help establish a pattern of behavior and reliance. He also recommended I immediately change all personal passwords and secure any remaining assets. He was not just a lawyer, he was a guide, offering a structured approach to a seemingly insurmountable problem. He confirmed that Clara's journal, if we could find it, would be crucial, but without it, the existing evidence, while strong for fraud, would be challenging for criminal prosecution without their apprehension. The weight of his words was immense, but his calm professionalism was a necessary counterpoint to my spiraling emotions. He was the first person outside of law enforcement who truly understood the deliberate criminal nature of what had happened. The sheer audacity of Arthur Jr.'s actions, the calculated nature of his deception, had stripped away layers of paternal optimism and naive trust, leaving behind a raw, unvarnished clarity about the true state of my family relationships. I spent hours poring over my financial records, not just to gather evidence for Detective Miller, but to truly understand the extent of what had been taken. The sheer volume of money, the years of sacrifice represented by each transfer, each investment Arthur Jr. had requested. It was staggering. It wasn't just about the monetary value. It was about the misplaced trust, the emotional currency I had so freely spent, believing it was an investment in love and loyalty. I realized with a painful clarity how much of my life had been defined by Arthur Jr.'s needs, how his aspirations had dictated my financial decisions, how my own goals and desires had been placed on indefinite hold, waiting for a future that now seemed like a cruel illusion. The house, once a symbol of my stability, my anchor in the world, now felt like a stark reminder of my vulnerability, a space that could be taken from me at any moment. Yet as I sat in Arthur Sr.'s study, surrounded by his well-worn books and cherished mementos, a quiet determination began to take root, pushing back against the despair. Arthur Sr. had trusted me to manage his affairs, and I would not fail him now, nor would I fail myself. I started taking small, deliberate steps to reclaim my sense of self, to rebuild a life that was no longer solely defined by my son's needs or his betrayals. I visited Eleanor's grave, not in sorrow, but in quiet communion, sharing my plight, seeking her enduring wisdom and the strength she always seemed to possess. I went to the local art supply store, a place I hadn't visited in years, and bought canvases and paints, rediscovering a dormant passion for art that had been overshadowed by familial obligations. I started attending the bridge club meetings Mrs. Gable had recommended, forcing myself to engage, to converse, to be present in the moment, away from the suffocating shadow of Arthur Jr. Betrayal. These were not grand gestures, but small, deliberate acts of self-preservation, tentative steps towards rebuilding a life that was solely my own, a life no longer dictated by the needs or deceits of others. The isolation was still profound, the loss of my son a gaping wound that ached with a constant dull throb, but the burgeoning sense of self-reliance, the quiet strength unearthed by adversity, began to offer a fragile yet persistent glimmer of hope. Mrs. Gable, in particular, became an invaluable mentor. She shared stories of her own financial struggles after her husband's sudden death, how she had rebuilt her life through sheer determination and a strong support network. She introduced me to her circle of friends, women who had faced similar betrayals, financial ruin, and profound loss, but had emerged with resilience, grace, and a shared understanding. This new community, forged in shared experience, offered a lifeline, a reminder that I was not alone and that recovery was possible. The sheer audacity of Arthur Jr.'s actions, the calculated nature of his deception, had stripped away layers of paternal optimism and naive trust, leaving behind a raw, unvarnished clarity about the true state of my family relationships. I spent hours poring over my financial records, not just to gather evidence for Detective Miller, but to truly understand the extent of what had been taken. The sheer volume of money, the years of sacrifice represented by each transfer, each investment Arthur Jr. had requested, it was staggering. It wasn't just about the monetary value, it was about the misplaced trust, the emotional currency I had so freely spent, believing it was an investment in love and loyalty. I realized with a painful clarity how much of my life had been defined by Arthur Jr.'s needs, how his aspirations had dictated my financial decisions, how my own goals and desires had been placed on indefinite hold, waiting for a future that now seemed like a cruel illusion. The house, once a symbol of my stability, my anchor in the world, now felt like a stark reminder of my vulnerability, a space that could be taken from me at any moment. Yet, as I sat in Arthur Sr.'s study, surrounded by his well-worn books and cherished mementos, a quiet determination began to take root, pushing back against the despair. Arthur Sr. had trusted me to manage his affairs, and I would not fail him now, nor would I fail myself. I started taking small, deliberate steps to reclaim my sense of self, to rebuild a life that was no longer solely defined by my son's needs or his betrayals. I visited Eleanor's grave, not in sorrow, but in quiet communion, sharing my plight, seeking her enduring wisdom and the strength she always seemed to possess. I went to the local art supply store, a place I hadn't visited in years, and bought canvases and paints, rediscovering a dormant passion for art that had been overshadowed by familial obligations. I started attending the bridge club meetings Mrs. Gable had recommended, forcing myself to engage, to converse, to be present in the moment, away from the suffocating shadow of Arthur Jr.'s betrayal. These were not grand gestures, but small, deliberate acts of self-preservation, tentative steps towards rebuilding a life that was solely my own, a life no longer dictated by the needs or deceits of others. The isolation was still profound, the loss of my son a gaping wound that ached with a constant dull throb, but the burgeoning sense of self-reliance, the quiet strength unearthed by adversity, began to offer a fragile yet persistent glimmer of hope. Mrs. Gable, in particular, became an invaluable mentor. She shared stories of her own financial struggles after her husband's sudden death, how she had rebuilt her life through sheer determination and a strong support network. She introduced me to her circle of friends, women who had faced similar betrayals, financial ruin, and profound loss, but had emerged with resilience, grace, and a shared understanding. This new community, forged in shared experience, offered a lifeline, a reminder that I was not alone and that recovery was possible. I began to focus on small, achievable goals, organizing my finances, securing my remaining assets, and establishing new routines that prioritized my own well-being. The initial shock had given way to a period of profound grief and isolation, but as I began to take these small steps, a sense of agency started to emerge, a realization that even in the face of devastating loss, I had the capacity to rebuild and to heal. The introspection allowed me to see my past reliance not as a weakness, but as a natural consequence of love and trust, and to consciously choose a different path forward, one defined by self-respect and independence. Detective Miller's initial professional optimism about recovering the funds began to wane as the investigation progressed, each lead turning colder than the last. Arthur Jr. and Clara had vanished without a trace, their digital footprints expertly erased, their presence in the world seemingly dissolved. The wedding itself, Miller explained, had been a meticulously orchestrated event, with Clara's own family allegedly complicit in the setup, providing a seemingly legitimate backdrop for their elaborate departure. The funds, transferred through a complex web of offshore accounts and cryptocurrency, were proving maddeningly elusive, their trail vanishing into the vast anonymity of the global financial system. Detective Miller confirmed my worst fears. Arthur Jr. had systematically leveraged my accounts, draining them through a series of unauthorized transfers just hours after the wedding, disappearing with Clara, and likely using the stolen funds to establish a new life elsewhere, far from any accountability. The sheer scale of the deception, the calculated months-in-the-making criminal enterprise that had stolen not only my life savings, but my very sense of reality, was overwhelming. It wasn't just a moment of youthful recklessness. It was a premeditated act of profound betrayal. The wedding, the celebration of family unity, had been the final, crucial piece of their meticulously planned exit strategy. The emotional toll was immense. I felt violated, foolish beyond measure, and utterly alone. The house, once my sanctuary, now felt like a stark reminder of my vulnerability, a place where my deepest trust had been so brutally broken. I spent days sorting through Arthur Jr.'s belongings, a painful, cathartic process, searching for any clue, any scrap of information that might explain the depths of his deception, a futile attempt to make sense of the incomprehensible. Tucked away in a dusty box of old letters, hidden beneath childish drawings and school reports, I found a hidden journal. It wasn't Arthur Jr.'s, but Clara's. Reading its pages was like entering a chilling alternate reality, a precise chronicle of their elaborate plan, detailing their desperate financial situation, their methodical exploitation of my trust, and their cold, calculated decision to disappear immediately after the wedding. The journal named specific accomplices, including Clara's own brother, who, according to her meticulous entries, had facilitated the offshore transfers and provided crucial logistical support. This journal, discovered by chance, a hidden testament to their conspiracy, became the cornerstone of my defense, the tangible proof that this was not an impulsive act, but a deliberate, premeditated crime. It was the evidence I needed to present to Detective Miller, the key that could potentially unlock the path to justice, transforming my personal tragedy into a prosecutable case. The rising tension wasn't just about the financial loss. It was about the horrifying realization that the crime was far more intricate and malicious than I had initially understood, involving multiple participants and a disturbing level of premeditation. Detective Miller's investigation, while thorough, highlighted the significant challenges ahead. Tracing funds through cryptocurrency and offshore accounts was a lengthy and often fruitless endeavor. The legal avenues for civil recovery were complex, requiring proof of conspiracy and potentially involving international legal hurdles. Clara's family, when approached, offered evasive answers, further cementing their suspected involvement. The initial shock began to transform into a cold, hard resolve. This was no longer just about recovering stolen money. It was about holding those responsible accountable and preventing them from inflicting similar pain on others. My focus shifted from mourning the loss of my son to actively pursuing justice for the crime he and others had committed against me. Armed with Clara's journal, its chillingly detailed confessions serving as undeniable proof, and a renewed, steely sense of purpose, I returned to Mr. Davies, my trusted estate lawyer. He examined the journal with a grave expression, recognizing its immense potential as a critical piece of evidence. "This is damning, Theodore," he stated, his voice serious, his gaze meeting mine with a professional solemnity. "This provides motive and intent. It implicates others and clearly shows this was not a spur-of-the-moment act, but a well-orchestrated plan." Our strategy began to solidify around this damning evidence. We would use the journal to support Detective Miller's ongoing investigation, providing crucial leads and corroborating details. More importantly, it would form the bedrock of our case against Clara and any identified accomplices for fraud and conspiracy. Mr. Davies also advised me on the legal avenues available to freeze any assets that might be traced back to Arthur Jr. and Clara, though he cautioned that recovering the full amount would likely be a long, arduous, and potentially incomplete process. Detective Miller, upon reviewing the journal's contents, expressed a renewed determination. "This changes things significantly, Theodore," she acknowledged, her professional demeanor shifting from weary pragmaticism to focused resolve. "It gives us actionable leads, names to pursue, and a clearer picture of the scope of this operation. We can now build a comprehensive case not just for theft, but for conspiracy and potentially fraud involving multiple parties." She immediately began the painstaking process of obtaining warrants, tracing complex financial links and coordinating with international law enforcement agencies, a daunting task that underscored the seriousness of the situation. Meanwhile, Mrs. Gable and her bridge club became my steadfast anchors in the storm. They helped me navigate the overwhelming practicalities of my drastically reduced circumstances, organizing small, informal fundraisers to help with immediate expenses, offering invaluable emotional counsel, and providing a much-needed sense of community and shared humanity. They encouraged me to focus on rebuilding my life, reminding me gently but firmly that Arthur Jr.'s betrayal did not define my own worth, nor did it diminish the life I had built before him. I started attending therapy, a suggestion from Mrs. Gable, to process the complex, conflicting emotions of grief for the son I thought I knew, the simmering anger at the betrayal, and the profound sense of loss that permeated my days. The process was painful, often emotionally taxing, but undeniably cathartic, helping me to reframe the narrative from one of helpless victimhood to one of resilient self-preservation. I began to meticulously document every aspect of my life that had been impacted, not just the financial devastation, but the emotional toll, the social isolation, and the psychological impact of such a profound breach of trust. This preparation wasn't just for a legal battle. It was for my own psychological recovery, a methodical process of reclaiming my narrative and rebuilding my sense of self-worth, piece by painstaking piece. The determination was clear, resonating within me like a battle cry. The war had officially begun, but I was ready to fight. Mr. Davies secured affidavits from my bank manager, who confirmed the unusual and rapid depletion of my accounts, and from the wedding caterer and venue manager, who provided receipts for the significant sums I had paid for Arthur Jr.'s wedding, further corroborating the timeline of my financial loss against the wedding's extravagant demands. The courtroom was a stark, impersonal space, its austere architecture and hushed atmosphere a world away from the festive, yet ultimately hollow grandeur of Arthur Jr.'s wedding. The proceedings felt surreal, a legal battle against my own son, a man whose very existence had been intertwined with my deepest love and trust, now standing as an adversary. Clara, her face a carefully constructed mask of cold composure, sat beside her lawyer, Mr. Sterling. the same formidable litigator Arthur Jr. had engaged for their wedding, a man whose reputation for aggressive tactics preceded him. Sterling, with practiced efficiency, presented their defense, subtly portraying Arthur Jr. as a victim of his father's overly generous financial support, a young man trying to establish his independence, and painting me as an overly trusting parent who had been taken advantage of. They presented the wedding photos, the vendor invoices, and Arthur Jr.'s carefully crafted narrative of youthful financial struggles, all designed to create an impression of normalcy and deflect blame. Their key witness, Clara's brother, testified that Arthur Jr. had been acting independently, making his own business decisions, and that the substantial transfers from my accounts were legitimate business transactions. He presented a heavily edited version of events, omitting any mention of the wedding as a cover, their subsequent disappearance, or Clara's journal detailing their conspiracy. Then it was my turn to take the stand. Facing Arthur Jr. and Clara across the courtroom, their faces impassive, their eyes devoid of any recognition of the woman who had raised one and loved the other for so long, I felt a surge of unwavering resolve, a quiet strength that had been forged in the fires of betrayal. Mr. Davies guided me through my testimony, allowing me to speak directly to the court, to lay bare the truth of the past year, not with anger, but with the quiet, unwavering conviction of truth. I recounted the wedding, the empty bank account, the vanishing act. I presented Clara's journal, its pages filled with chillingly precise details of their conspiracy, the names of accomplices, the methodical planning. Detective Miller testified about the difficulty in tracing the funds and the evidence gathered, pointing to a deliberate scheme, including the journal and the suspicious offshore transfers. Mr. Harrison, Arthur Sr. EES business partner, testified to Arthur Sr. S. deep love for me and his unwavering commitment to my financial security, directly contradicting the narrative presented by Arthur Jr.'s defense. Mrs. Gable provided a powerful character reference for me, highlighting my stability, my resilience, and my unwavering devotion to my family, painting a picture of a loving parent, not a manipulated or mentally unfit individual. My own testimony was the emotional core of the trial. I spoke of my life with Arthur Sr., of his values, his deep affection for me, and the stark contrast between the man I knew and the man who had orchestrated this devastating betrayal. Because I finally understood that what I was getting from them was not love, I stated, my voice clear and strong. It was a calculated exploitation of my paternal love. My money was welcome, but I, as a person, was not. The cross-examination by Mr. Sterling was brutal, an attempt to portray my grief as delusion, my pursuit of justice as a desperate, irrational act. But I held firm, my answers clear, my emotions raw but honest, articulating the truth of my experience without wavering. He tried to twist my efforts to protect myself financially into evidence of erratic behavior. But I calmly explained the necessity of securing my remaining assets after discovering the extent of the fraud. The turning point came when Mr. Davies presented the forensic analysis of Arthur Sr.'s signature on the wedding-related expenses, which seemed to match the slightly shaky yet genuine signature on his earlier true will, a subtle but crucial point highlighting the contrast to the potentially forged signature on the fraudulent document Sterling was trying to uphold. The judge, Justice Sterling, a woman known for her impartiality and her unwavering dedication to upholding justice, delivered her verdict after a tense period of deliberation that felt like an eternity. She acknowledged the overwhelming evidence presented, particularly Clara's journal, which meticulously detailed the conspiracy and the testimonies that spoke to Arthur Jr. His calculated actions and Clara's manipulative planning. She highlighted the substantial financial losses I had incurred and the clear pattern of exploitation. The evidence strongly suggests a calculated scheme of financial fraud and deception, Justice Sterling stated, her voice firm and resonant. The wedding served as a cover for the perpetrators to abscond with the victim's life savings. The court finds Arthur Vance Jr. and Clara Vance guilty of fraud and conspiracy. Restitution will be ordered, and warrants have been issued for their arrest. While recovery of the funds is complex, the principle of accountability will be pursued vigorously. A collective sigh of relief rippled through the room, a palpable release of tension. I had won. It wasn't just about regaining the money, though that was a crucial component of justice. It was about vindication. It was about proving that truth, however buried, would ultimately prevail. Arthur Jr. and Clara, their faces ashen, were escorted from the courtroom by bailiffs, their calculated performance crumbling under the weight of evidence and law. Their absence, once a source of profound pain, now represented a necessary severing. Justice, in this instance, had been served, not with vengeance, but with the quiet, profound affirmation of what was right and lawful. The verdict marked the end of one harrowing chapter and the beginning of another, the chapter of my own rebuilding. The days following the court's verdict were suffused with a profound sense of quiet victory and a deep, restorative relief that seeped into my very bones. The house, once the looming specter of my impending loss, the physical embodiment of my deepest betrayal, was now a sanctuary reclaimed, its familiar walls breathing with the echoes of a life truly lived, a life now secured against further predation. I walked through each room, my fingers tracing the worn wood of the banister Arthur Sr. and I had chosen together, my gaze lingering on the faded photographs on the mantelpiece, snapshots not of a fading past, but of a vibrant history built on love, trust, and shared dreams. The legal victory had not erased the sharp sting of betrayal, the deep wound left by my son's actions, but it had irrevocably shifted the ground beneath my feet, paving the way for a genuine healing, a process of rebuilding that began not with forgetting, but with integrating the painful lessons learned. I made the difficult decision to sell the house, the place that held too many memories of both joy and profound sorrow. The proceeds, though significantly less than what had been stolen, were carefully managed with Mr. Davies' guidance. A portion was used to establish a foundation in Arthur Sr.'s name, dedicated to supporting victims of financial fraud and elder abuse, a cause that now resonated deeply with my own experience. The remainder was reinvested, not for Arthur Jr., but for my own future, for the travels and pursuits I had postponed for so long. I moved into a comfortable, manageable apartment in a quiet neighborhood, a space that felt manageable and truly mine. My days transformed. I traveled to places Arthur Sr. and I had always dreamed of visiting, fulfilling long-held aspirations. I enrolled in art classes, rediscovering a dormant passion for painting, the canvas becoming a space to express the vibrant emotions I had suppressed for years. I volunteered at a local community center, sharing my story not for pity, but to offer hope and practical advice to others who had faced similar betrayals. The quiet moments spent in my new home were no longer shadowed by dread or anxiety, but filled with a profound sense of peace and deep contentment. I spent more time with Mrs. Gable and her friends, their camaraderie a warm balm to the solitude I had once feared. I reconnected with friends I had gradually drifted from, rediscovering the simple joy of genuine companionship, relationships built on mutual respect and shared experiences, not on financial obligation or unspoken expectations. The house was gone, but in its place I had found something far more valuable, a renewed sense of self, a testament to my resilience, and a spirit unburdened by the weight of my son's betrayal. One crisp autumn afternoon, as I sat on my balcony watching the city lights twinkle below, a view so different from the familiar oak tree in my old yard, a profound sense of peace settled over me, deep and unwavering. The apartment was quiet, filled with the gentle hum of a life finally lived on my own terms. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, a spectacle I now had the freedom to truly appreciate. I had faced my deepest fears, confronted betrayal at its most devastating, and emerged not just intact, but stronger, wiser, and more fully myself than I had ever believed possible. The inheritance of lies, the foundation of my pain, had paradoxically led me to the greatest inheritance of all, the profound and unshakable truth of my own self-worth, and the unshakable freedom to live my life, finally, for myself. Arthur Jr. Actions had been a brutal lesson, a shattering of illusions, but they had also been a catalyst. They had forced me to confront the extent to which I had allowed my identity to be subsumed by the needs of others, to the detriment of my own well-being. True love, I now understood, cannot be bought or sold. It is a freely given gift, never a transaction. And freedom, the freedom to live authentically, to pursue my passions, to simply be, is a treasure that is never too expensive, no matter the cost of acquiring it. My name was not vanished from my life, nor was my house. They were mine, in every sense of the word, a testament to a battle fought and won, a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit, and a promise of a future finally lived with authenticity and joy. My name is Theodore Vance. I am 71 years old, and after a lifetime of giving, I have finally learned the invaluable lesson of self-preservation and self-love. The journey from the shock of betrayal to this quiet liberation had been arduous, marked by tears, anger, and a fear I once thought would consume me. But through it all, I discovered a strength I never knew I possessed. Arthur Sr.'s legacy wasn't just in the house, it was in the resilience he had instilled in me, in the unwavering love that, even in death, guided me back to myself. Arthur Jr. and Clara's actions, born of greed and a profound lack of character, had inadvertently freed me from a life lived in service of their desires, allowing me to finally live a life for myself. If my story resonated with you, if you saw a reflection of your own struggles or triumphs, or if it simply moved you, I would be deeply grateful for your support. Your engagement helps me continue to share these narratives of resilience and hope. Please consider leaving a comment below. I am always eager to hear your thoughts. What would you do in my place? How would you navigate such a profound betrayal? Your perspectives are invaluable to me. For more stories of courage, the overcoming of adversity, and the quiet triumph of the human spirit, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. There are many other stories waiting to be told, each one a testament to the enduring power of truth and self-discovery. With heartfelt greetings, and until next time,